So look at Anthony Ryder from South Lyon, Michigan, recently selected as the Lions 2020 Fan of the Year. He has a passion about sports broadcasting.
With the 112th selection in the 2021 NFL Draft, the Detroit Lions select Amon-Ra St. Brown, wide receiver, USC. One pride, baby! Yeah! What is going on, everybody? Welcome back to another Detroit Lions video. The Detroit Lions have a divisional matchup this week. After coming home in a hard-fought victory versus the Los Angeles Chargers, the Lions return home in Week 11 to take on the division rival Chicago Bears, a team that currently sits at 3-7, but has had a couple flashy performances, has had a couple great performances out of their quarterback, Justin Fields, and is looking to gain a little bit of momentum going into the latter half of the season, while the Detroit Lions look to remain at the top of the NFC North and continue to extend that lead over the incoming weeks. So today, we're going to take a look at that matchup. We're going to take a look at the Bears versus the Lions, the 7-2 Lions versus the 3-7 Bears. Both teams coming off of a 3-point victory, and both teams looking to continue their winning streak against the divisional foe. So, starting off, let's take a look at the Detroit Lions. The Detroit Lions are pretty much the team that they've been all season. They are an elite offense, and they are a very, very average defense. The Lions currently rank as the 4th best passing offense in the NFL, the 4th best rushing offense in the NFL, and as far as points scored per game, they rank 6th in the NFL. They are a top 10 offense in every single offensive metric you could use to measure them. They are just, quite honestly, they are an elite offense. They have all the tools they need to be the best offense in the NFL, and they are playing really, really well at this point in the season. But their defense has had a couple strides and a couple of back steps, right? Their defense currently ranks 16th in the NFL against the pass, 3rd against the run, and 21st in points allowed after allowing 38 points a week ago versus the Los Angeles Chargers, after allowing 36 to Baltimore and 37 to Seattle. Their points per game really isn't that good, and it's being skewed quite a bit by games like the Falcons game where they allowed 6, by the Raiders game where they allowed 12, by the Tampa Bay game where they allowed 6, and the Falcons game, if I hadn't said that already. They've had 3 games allowing just 1 offensive touchdown, but they've also had 3 games allowing over 36 points in games that they really needed the offense to step up and be great, and the offense was only good enough to do so in 1 of those 3 games. The defense has to start stepping up more consistently against better quarterbacks if the Lions want to go on a deep playoff run. I think it is very much good enough for them to win a division title and potentially even a playoff game, but I really do fear that going against some of the elite quarterbacks, that this defense isn't going to be quite up to caliber to go against guys even as good as, say, Geno Smith or Dak Prescott come playoff time. I think that they are going to be able to put up quite a few points on our defense because so far this season, pretty much every good quarterback has put up pretty big numbers against the Lions. Luckily enough, though, they don't play a very good quarterback this week. Taking a look at the Bears actually have a couple of standout statistics, but other than that, they are very much bottom of the league still. They rank 24th in passing offense in the NFL. Granted, obviously, Justin Fields has been out for a large part of the season. He's been out for a significant amount of time to affect that, but their rushing attack is still really good, ranking 5th in the NFL in rushing yards per game. They are still a great rushing offense, and their offensive line has actually done a really good job creating some push and giving the running back some space to work with, putting them as a top 5 rushing attack in the league. But as far as points per game, they only rank 19th in that area. They don't put up a lot of points, but they do run the ball pretty well. And that is something that is going to challenge the Detroit Lions up front. Defensively, they're actually very similar. They are not a very good pass defense, ranking just 26th in the NFL, but their run defense actually ranks higher than the Detroit Lions. They rank as the 2nd best rushing defense as far as yards per game, and they actually rank as the very best in yards per carry in the NFL. They are a very strong run defense, and they only got better after adding Montez Sweat a couple weeks ago, but then you drop back down, right? Points per game, 27th in the NFL. They've had some big numbers put up on them, especially through the air. And I think that's where the Detroit Lions are really going to be able to hurt them on Sunday. Is there's going to be a passing attack. Jared Goff and Amon-Ra St. Brown are going to have to connect quite a few times if they want to put up points on Chicago, because much like the LA Chargers of last week, they have a good run defense, but they don't have a very good secondary. They don't have a very cohesive unit in the back end. And they should be able to create some miscommunications and be able to put up some big points and big numbers versus a Bears defense that has struggled over the entirety of the season. Now, taking a look at some of the matchups, I do think the Detroit Lions outmatched the Chicago Bears in just about every single category, but I don't think the gap is nearly as wide as it was a season ago, right? Last season, we saw the Bears come into Ford Field. We saw them go down 41-10 in a game that truly just wasn't very competitive. I think this game will be more competitive, but I think that they're in very different stages as franchises, right? I think the Chicago Bears are kind of in the early to middle stages of their rebuild. They still have inconsistent quarterback play. They still really don't have a great coaching staff. They're missing a couple pieces on offense and defense, but they do have pieces in place to build around, whereas the Detroit Lions are kind of at the tail end of their rebuild. They are missing a couple pieces here and there, but their coaching staff is in place. Their quarterback play is really good. Their offense is elite. Their coordinators are pretty solid, right? And they're not necessarily an elite football team yet. They're not necessarily a Super Bowl contender because, like I said, I do think they're missing a couple pieces still, but I think they're more towards the latter end of their rebuild more so than the Bears. The Lions offensive line is better than the Chicago offensive line. It's not even, or than the Chicago defensive line. This one's not really close. The Chicago Bears really don't have that much pressure, don't have that many pass rushers. If the Lions can hold Penei Sewell and Taylor Decker can hold Joey Bosa and Khalil Mack to zero pressures on the day, I think they can do the same thing to Montez Sweat and Yannick Ngakoue. The interior of the offensive line, if it is healthy, because that is a question mark, should be able to take care of the rookies and should be able to do their thing and move the ball pretty well versus Chicago. Our running backs versus their linebackers is one of those matchups that is really, really close. And if you wanted to say that the Chicago linebackers are better, I honestly think there's a very fair point for that. I think TJ Edwards is one of the most underrated linebackers in the NFL. And Tremaine Edmonds, despite being heavily overpaid for his production, is also a really solid and very strong linebacker. Now, Tremaine Edmonds may not play, which is a big bonus for the Detroit Lions, but TJ Edwards almost certainly is playing, and he will be a threat on the Detroit Lions. He is, I think, their best defensive player. He is, I believe, top 5 in tackles in the NFL. He's really, really good. He has a great instincts, a great tackler, just an all-around really, really good linebacker. And as I said, I think one of the most underrated defensive players in the league. But I think that Jahmyr Gibbs and David Montgomery together will be better than the duo of Edwards and whoever is lining up next to him, even if it is and does happen to be Tremaine Edmonds. Wide receivers versus defensive backs, I don't think this one's quite as close. Amon-Ra St. Brown is an elite wide receiver, 4 100-yard games in his last 4 appearances. He is going to be great. He might go for 100 yards for a 5th straight game. It is very likely and very possible, especially with the connection he has with Jared Goff. Jameson Williams is finding some stride. Khalif Raymond is a really good wide receiver. Obviously, we still have Josh Reynolds, the guy that, again, super underrated wide receiver, but comes up with big plays every single time you need it. I think our wide receiving core is better than the Chicago secondary, and I think that goes for our tight end as well. Sam Laporta is one of the best, if not the best, rookie tight ends we have seen in a very, very long time. He is, I believe, still top 5 in receiving yards amongst all tight ends in the NFL. His connection with Jared Goff grows every single week, and I just don't think they have a guy that's going to match up very well with Sam Laporta man-to-man. I think he's really just too good to play zone against. He knows really well where to sit down in zones, where to kind of sit and wait for Jared Goff to get him the ball. And I do think Sam Laporta is better than the Chicago safeties, but I do think the safeties are pretty good. Eddie Jackson's a good safety. Jaquan Brisker's a good safety. I just think that Sam Laporta is going to get the better of them on this particular day. Now, taking a look at the other side of the ball, I also didn't mention, but obviously Jared Goff is playing at a much higher level than Justin Fields is right now. I don't think that's much of a debate. Jared Goff is a significantly better quarterback at this point in their careers than Justin Fields is. But Justin Fields, to his credit, is a more dynamic playmaker. Going over to the Bears, I think the defensive line for the Lions is better than the offensive line for the Chicago Bears. But again, I think this is one where it's going to be pretty close. I think this matchup is going to be decided between Aiden Hutchinson and Darnell Wright. I think those two going head-to-head is going to be a really fun matchup to watch, and I think Aiden Hutchinson should win that matchup, but I think Darnell Wright is going to put in quite a few shots of his own. I think Darnell Wright is going to be a very good tackle long-term. He's going through some rookie growing pains, which is where I think Aiden Hutchinson might get him, and the rest of that defensive line. I know Aleem McNeil is having a phenomenal year, and I think he can do some damage on the interior. Hopefully the other edge rushers can work and get a little bit of pressure on Justin, but I do think the defensive line will win this battle, but I think it will be really close, and I don't think it'll be nearly as hectic or chaotic as it was last year, as we saw James Houston get 3 sacks, as we saw the Lions, I think, get 7 sacks as a team. I don't think they'll quite get there, but I think they should have probably 3 or 4 on the Chicago offensive line. But as I said, they're a much better run blocking unit than they are a pass blocking unit. So I think they could win in the running game as well, but that is yet to be seen. As far as running backs versus linebackers, I think our linebackers are going to be able to take away the running back. They don't nearly have the dynamic playmakers out of the backfield that we do, right? You have obviously Dante Foreman, I believe is his name. I know Foreman is his last name. He is a really good running back, but he's more of the power guy between the tackles, and the Lions have pretty much done really well versus those running backs and those kinds of running backs for the entirety of the season. They have Roshan Johnson, who again is kind of more of a big body power guy, more so than a speed gadget player. And the Lions have done really well containing running backs to career lows to season lows all year long. And I don't think Dante Foreman is going to be the one to break that trend, but I do think the Bears running back core is a little bit underrated in the NFL as well. Wide receivers versus defensive backs. Quite honestly, I think you could give it to either side, but I gave it to Chicago because I do think DJ Moore is a very talented wide receiver. Now, that doesn't necessarily mean they're going to win the matchups because Justin Fields still has to get them the football, but I do think DJ Moore is really good. I do think Darnell Mooney is very dangerous, and I do think that those two at wide receiver could give the Detroit Lions a little bit of problems in the same way that Zay Flowers gave the Detroit Lions problems. I think Darnell Mooney can do the same thing, and of course, DJ Moore being the big physical wide receiver has given Detroit Lions trouble in the past, right? Big guys like DK Metcalf, big guys like Keenan Allen, they typically give the Detroit Lions trouble. The big-bodied wide receivers who aren't afraid to be physical, they do give the Lions some trouble, and I do think DJ Moore fits that build and could give Cam Sutton a very, very tough matchup for the entirety of the day. But going back onto the Detroit Lions' favor, I do think that the Lions safeties will be able to contain Cole Kmet. Cole Kmet, I think, is a top 10 tight end in the league. I think it's pretty safe to say he's a top 10 tight end. However, I don't think he's necessarily going to have a great day. He's the third best tight end in the division. He is a good tight end. He's not a great tight end. He might have a couple plays. He might even have a touchdown, but I don't think he's going to have the biggest day for the Chicago Bears this time around, especially with the new quarterback coming back in. His connection with Justin Fields might be a little strained, so that could also play a factor as well. Taking a look at some of the wins the Lions have had, because I think this puts into context how good the Lions have been versus bad teams, and comparing the Lions wins to the Chicago Bears wins, I think is going to give you a good grasp of how this game is going to go. The Lions have played 5 teams under 500 at the time of playing them, or as of right now, right? The Falcons right now are under 500, I believe, and they beat them by 14. They're right around 500, so they're not a bad football team, but they beat them by 14. Green Bay, they beat them by 14. Green Bay has a losing record. Carolina, of course, being 1-7 or 1-8 at this point, they beat Carolina by 16. They beat Tampa Bay by 14. They beat Las Vegas, who actually now has a winning record, by 12. Right? And they just went and beat, who now has a losing record, the LA Chargers, by 3 points as well. So they've done really well. They've played really, really well, especially offensively versus some of the bottom teams in the NFL. And that does include the Chicago Bears. The Chicago Bears are 3-7. They're not a very good football team. And I think the Lions should be able to put up quite a few points. I think a game could turn out very much like this, where the Lions win by 10, 12, 14 points by the end of it, because I think they're just more complete right now than the Chicago Bears. But the Bears have had quite a few impressive wins as well. And by quite a few, I mean 2. But for the Chicago Bears last year, that would be pretty solid. So they beat Carolina by 3 last week in a really, really poor Thursday night football game. They beat the Washington Commanders by 20, and they beat the Raiders by 18. Now, granted, obviously, the Raiders were playing with their third-string quarterback, but the Bears were also playing with their backup quarterback. So it kind of does even out. Obviously, the turnovers help for the Bears. The pick six help for the Bears point total. But at the end of the day, the Bears have 2 wins by 18 and 20 points. So they aren't necessarily a bad football team. I think they're a very incomplete football team, but I think they're a very scrappy football team. They remind me quite a bit of the Detroit Lions kind of at the tail end of year 1, where they can win football games, right? The Lions in year 1, they beat Arizona by quite a few points. They beat a very good Green Bay team, right? They were able to compete and win quite a few decent games, but they just weren't a complete enough team to do it on a consistent level. I think that's where the Bears are at right now. I think the Bears are a significantly better football team than they were a year ago, but I still don't think they're quite on the level to compete with Detroit. So with that being said, I think the final score of this game turns out 35-17, which is actually kind of where I've been leading to, right? I think the Bears are an improved football team. I think the Lions are still the significantly better football team, but for a scoreline that was 42-10 a year ago, I think it is a 2-touchdown difference between last year and this year. I think the Lions score 1 less touchdown. I think the Bears gain 1 more touchdown, but I do still think the Lions are a significantly better football team. They are more complete. They don't have nearly as many holes. Their coaching staff is better. better. Their coaching style is better. They have a more established program, I guess, at this point, and they have the home field advantage. They have the Ford Field fans, right? Everything is leaning for the Detroit Lions, but it is a divisional game, and we've seen division games go crazy before. We saw the Denver Broncos just 2 weeks ago upset the Kansas City Chiefs as a divisional matchup, right? And we've seen them in 2 of their 3 games, right? They had a 2 out of 3 game stretch where they played the Broncos twice, and the Broncos played them close both times, home and away. So division matchups can get weird. Obviously, you play these teams more than anybody else, so you know how to stop these players. Division matchups are strange. The Lions very well could lose this game because I think Chicago is talented enough to beat anybody at this point, but I think 9 times out of 10, the Detroit Lions win this game by 10, 15 points. And I think this will be a pretty easy cruise for the Detroit Lions. On paper, it's probably the easiest game since Carolina. But again, the division matchup always makes things weird. But I think the Lions will still walk out with a very confident victory, 35-17. So with that being said, that is all I have for you guys today. Let me know down in the comments below what you think about this matchup. Do you think the Lions are going to win? Do you think the Lions are going to dominate? Do you think it's going to be close? Or do you think the Bears might even upset the Detroit Lions and put them back down to 7-3? I'd be very curious what you guys have to say and what you guys think about this matchup. But with all that being said, that's all I got for you guys right now. Thank you all so very much for watching. And until next time, and as always, go Lions.